to avoid the most common running injuries, from patellofemoral pain syndrome to IT band syndrome and shin splints to plantar fasciitis. I sat down with Dr. Mani Alavi from the Adaptation by Fire podcast to share some practical strategies to keep you running strong so you can enjoy lifelong injury-free running. In this chat, I debunk some myths that running damages your knees and highlight why a dynamic warm-up routine is essential for priming your body before hitting the pavement. Whether you're a new runner or you're a seasoned marathoner, this chat is packed with actionable advice to help you avoid these common injuries and enjoy your runs. We talked about patellofemoral pain syndrome and why you don't need to stop running if you have this condition. We talk about IT band syndrome and treatment strategies in order to get over that condition. We also chatted about shin splints, what they are, how do you get over that, as well as plantar fasciitis. These are the most common injuries that runners get. And we also talked about the importance of hip and glute strength in injury prevention, as well as foot health and proper progression with your running and your training. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did, and be sure to check out Dr. Mani Alavi's podcast, Adaptation for Fire, wherever you listen to your podcast. Without further ado, let's get into my chat with Dr. Mani.
Welcome to another episode of Adaptation by Fire. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Duane Scotti. Duane is a seasoned physical therapist, running coach, host of the Healthy Runner podcast, and founder of Spark Healthy Runner. With a doctorate in physical therapy, Duane has dedicated over 20 years to helping runners prevent and recover from injuries while achieving their personal best. His work focuses on addressing common running injuries, promoting injury prevention, and optimizing running performance. And I'll tell you, man, on a personal note, Duane is not only a highly respected professional, but he's also a genuinely nice guy. And I got to tell, like, recently, Duane, you opened up about the challenges of maintaining kind of a work-life balance and how this influenced your decision to focus on your current endeavors. So I guess thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your experience with us. That was kind of a moving episode.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, thanks for the introduction. It's great connecting with you, Mani. And yeah, if there's anything that I love talking about is how we can stay healthy as runners.
Duane, let me ask you, man, how's you're joining us from Connecticut today? Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. How's I guess late summer going there right now?
Yeah, this is like dog days of summer for us. So this is like what you experience probably like 4 months out of the year. This is our hot season. So yeah, the dew point was, it's been like 73 degrees, 74 degrees the last 4 days. I know we had a chat previously about dew point and how running is much different, and the sweat's just like falling off your body and droplets are hitting the ground and you're like, I'm not cooling my body right now.
Oh my
I was
goodness.
thinking about you when and yeah, so this is the hot part of the season for us here in Connecticut.
Yeah, it gets kind of humid there too, if I remember correctly. So I think today we're gonna talk all things, running injury, and I think we're gonna focus the discussion not just on like what they are and just the bullet points, but maybe how to prevent them, how to maybe diagnose them early, how to maybe, I guess the bottom line for most runners, what I like about your work is, we want to continue running. We want to not be in a situation where we have to take, several weeks and several months off from running. So maybe we can kind of approach it from that angle if possible, not only just what they are, but how to maybe even prevent them, how to diagnose them early so they don't lead to some kind of long-term sort of issue. But before we even get there, tell us a little bit more about your background and what you do in your line of work.
Yeah, so this is kind of maybe I'll start with the beginning of my running journey, which wasn't that long ago, because it was a time period where it was like a low point in my life where I literally couldn't sit for like more than 10 minutes because pain in my sit bone, my upper hamstring area, and this was like very frustrating for myself as a, sports medicine physical therapist. And, the thought of like sitting in my car, like for my morning commute into the clinic, like stressed me out. And, let alone being told by my doctor to stop running until my injury healed. And I was at the time 31-year-old father of two little girls. I was gaining weight, like feeling out of shape for the first time in my life, getting the dad bod, and I couldn't run because of an injury. And, I'm sure your listeners might be able to relate to this. And, maybe it wasn't, upper hamstring tendon pain, but
Mhm.
they might have been in a similar situation. And, you know, I really learned during that journey of just kind of starting to run. I recently had hip surgery, I had a labral tear, and I was non-weight bearing due to a cartilage defect there. So I was, out of shape. I was like, all right. I was told to start running because that would help get me in shape. I was always like a gym rat, so to speak, since college. And, um, getting that first running related injury really was like demoralizing. And I was
Mm.
like, all right, what do I do for this? Oh, yeah, you get an injury. Maybe you should stretch it. And, doing some research, doing a little deep dive on like proximal hamstring tendinopathy, I learned that like stretching is the worst thing that you can do for that injury.
Yeah.
So that really kind of led me to almost like an epiphany in that, adult runners getting running related injuries is a lot different than adolescents getting injured like on the field, right?
Mm.
Or in sports. And it really kind of, led me down a pathway where, overcoming that injury myself and then really working with a lot of injured runners, it really came to this epiphany that like we as adults and whether you're an adult onset, runner like myself, or you're just an adult who's always run your whole life, like, you've run your whole life. As we age, we do need to like train in order to run. And, a lot of people think, okay, I'm a runner. I'm going out there for
Mm.
my exercise. I'm getting my daily, was it 30-minute recommendation of, exercise by the American Heart Association, right? Um,
Mm.
but we actually
21
need
minutes.
to, now it's only 21. Okay. Which is probably not enough, right? For most
We had a
individuals.
gentleman from, sorry to digress, we had a gentleman from Norway on the show who won Badwater, and it turns out the Norwegian recommendations are 60 minutes a day. So our standards are a little bit different, just just
Yeah,
as an aside.
it makes sense though. Think
Yeah.
about like how much more sedentary our society has become in the last couple decades, right? If you just think about that fact, that you got to counteract all of the time we're spending in front of computers and sitting, most of our days. So,
Yeah.
just training in order to run is like critical. What do I mean by that? Like we have to strength train. We have to do specific warm up activities versus just put our shoes on and go out the door and go for a run. In your teenage years, your 20s, and even your early 30s,
Hmm.
you can get away with that. But as you start creeping into the 40s, 50s, and beyond, there are certain strategies that we can do as runners to be able to like stay healthy and avoid many of the injuries like we're going to talk about today are actually preventable.
Yeah.
And, if you look at all the running related research out there, 7, to 9 runners listening to this right now, like out of 10 are going to get injured at some
Hmm.
point. And, the reason why the injury rates are so high is because a lot of it is due to honestly runner error. And a lot of it is training errors and not doing it enough of the things that I kind of mentioned in terms of like recovery, strength training as a component of your training so you can actually run. So
Mm.
that's kind of a
Well
little
said. Yeah.
backstory in how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Well, thank you for what you do. I think it's important for reasonable voices to be out there like you who are not telling people, hey, just running's bad for your knees or shut it down or go do something else. So I appreciate that. I guess let's start on the dark side first. When I guess I think we're both in the same philosophy: active recovery, preventing injuries, trying to maybe even try to rehab it while you're running, etc. But when should runners just like off the top, just know when to completely shut it down, like to stop running completely? What are some symptoms or conditions that are absolute don't run?
Yeah, so that's great that you brought that up because, we'd be remiss not to mention that. But the majority of running related injuries and the ones that, I'm sure we'll talk about today are, you can heal as you continue to run. So, we'll talk about that. But there are some, rare, we'll call them, injuries or conditions. The most common that runners would really face is a bone stress injury.
Mm,
So, that's the biggest one. And especially for those that are having, chronic shin splints that has progressed over time and now it's more localized, it's pinpoint, it is like specific right to that area, and it is reproduced anytime you're loading the bone, then you want to make sure and rule out that it's not a bone stress injury. So there's a whole spectrum of bone stress injuries, going from some inflammation around the bone,
mm,
to having some stress, to stress fracture. And then eventually, yeah, if you like leave that long enough, the bone will fracture. So we want to make sure that it's not a bone related injury. That's probably the most common kind of quote unquote red flag that we'd want to rule out. And for you to know as a runner, if you are struggling with an injury. But I will say that those are relatively rare, especially if you have not had a recent significant increase in training load and or a history of fractures or a history of low bone density. If that isn't you and you didn't have a rapid jump in mileage in your training, that most likely is not going to be the injury that you do have. But we want to make sure that if it is bone related, unfortunately, that is the only time that I ever have someone shut it down. And then, other ones would be something, they are more rare, but like compartment syndrome, where you're getting,
sure. Yeah.
significant swelling in both lower legs. Yeah, we're not going to be able to run through that. And that's not going to heal with specific exercises, or any nerve related pain. So, again, not as common in the running population, but any radiculopathy, a pinched nerve in the lumbar spine that's causing shooting pain, either into your calf, into your heel, you're getting numbness, tingling, right? Like those things. And especially if you're feeling that while you're running, yeah, running through that is not going to help whatsoever because it's not a specific soft tissue injury like the common culprits that we'll talk about, where it's a tendon, it's a fascia, or it's a kind of a joint and some cartilage irritation.
Hmm.
So those are the big ones that you just
I
want to
like it.
make sure that you're
Yeah.
not running through.
Yeah, so bone stress, bone fractures, obviously, or stress fractures, exertional compartment syndrome, and any kind of red flags symptoms, especially from, like you said, radicular pain and so forth. I like that. That's a good framework. Obviously, I would just say the biggest disclaimers: everything we're talking about, these are all for informational. Obviously, discuss it with your providers, etc. We can't obviously exhaust all the red flags here, but I think that's an awesome sort of framework. And I would add, I don't know if you agree with me, Duane. I mean, like running endurance events. Generally, you don't, it doesn't lead to devastating injuries, right? Like you're generally, unless you hit a pothole or something, you're not tearing your ACL, you're not, having long bone fractures, etc. So in that sense, I think it's all overuse injuries, a lot of, like you said, tendinopathies and so forth, where we'll talk about a little bit in more detail. But I think maybe that's the good news about running is generally you can run through it. Generally, you can prevent a lot of it. Generally, if your body adapts, you can maybe even be injury free. I don't know if you agree with that statement.
Absolutely. And yeah, like you said, and sometimes when I see people with like Achilles tendon pain, for example, who are getting better and they're having some symptoms, and let's say their race is coming up, and I always just reassure them, like, you know, you're running this race, you've been progressing as we go along, you're going to see how you feel during the race. And then you're going to get to a point where, you know, you're going to be like, okay, I can go here. And like your Achilles is not going to snap running an endurance event. Like that's not how it
That's
happens.
that's
It
a good
happens,
example. Yeah,
on the basketball court, soccer field. You stop real
yeah.
short, you pivot, more like deceleration type activities. It's not going to happen by you running straight plane in a half marathon or running a marathon. So yeah, to
Yeah.
your point, there really isn't kind of catastrophic type of consequences for the common running related injuries that we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, yeah, good point. I like that analogy. So, hey, let's just kind of start at the top. What do you? I mean, we're not going to be able to cover all of them, and maybe we'll split up and have you come back, etc. But let's just talk about maybe the top 3 or 4. What do you think are some of the top 3 or 4 common types of injuries that runners face, that in your experience?
Yeah, so I would say, definitely novice runners. Patellofemoral pain syndrome is a common one in our novice runners. Marathoners, IT band syndrome is a very common one that usually creeps up on the 14, 16, 18-mile long run. Um, Shin splints is more common in like novice runners as well, typically. And then, plantar fasciitis is another common one that you can see in novice or seasoned runners that unfortunately will give them that heel pain first step out of bed in the morning, worse like the day after a long run. So I would say those are the big common culprits.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree with that list. That's a very good list. Those are probably a big percentage of running injuries in general. But yeah, let's start at the top, and the knee. Let's talk about the patellofemoral. This term. So just for our listeners, this has so many terms. Sometimes in medicine we give certain things multiple different definitions or terms. So this is also known as runner's knee, jumper's knee, etc. So patellofemoral syndrome. Dwayne, maybe you can tell us just briefly what that is, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about like the symptoms and what we can do to prevent it, and maybe some treatments.
Yeah, so this is one that I'm definitely passionate about. So I actually did my dissertation for my academic PhD work in patellofemoral syndrome
Oh,
and
perfect.
IT band length for patellofemoral, patients. So yeah, did way too many research articles and studying in patellofemoral syndrome. But this is really an irritation of the cartilage on the undersurface of the kneecap. So under your kneecap, if you flip it over, there's a little cartilage, and there's cartilage on the femur bone that it glides on. And it could be irritation of this cartilage that causes pain. And that's where I'll kind of talk about the traditional patellofemoral pain syndrome, or what we call runner's knee. The jumper's knee is usually a little bit more specific to patellar tendinopathy. So more the tendon, not as common in runners. Runners can get it, especially if they're doing a lot of downhill running. But that one is also usually associated with a huge spike in training load.
Hmm.
Patellofemoral pain syndrome, the kind of classic, it's diffuse pain. You cannot like point to it. It's like the front of your knee. You kind of reach all around. You can't really like point to a
Mm.
specific spot usually. So it's really in like the front of the knee, could be a little bit more to the inside of the knee as well. And, this pain is really going to be worse after any type of repetitive bending activities, such as squatting, lunging. So if you are doing some strength training, it might irritate you with that. Kneeling, sitting with your knee bent at like a 90-degree angle for
Hmm.
prolonged periods of time. I was actually joking about a client the other day about this because we used to call it moviegoer's knee, and
Oh,
that's what we
really?
used to teach. But like now, all the movies have recliners, and your knee's
Yeah.
never at 90 degrees. And most people aren't even going to the movies; they're watching everything in their living rooms. Um, but yeah, that's what it used to be called, because when your knees at that bent 90-degree angle, it kind of gets irritated. You go to stand up, and there's some pain with that. Um, the biggest reason like runners get this, and why I see it a lot in novice runners, is because it is usually associated with a huge um, like gait flaw. And it's like when you
Yeah.
start running, we're just trying to go out there and run as fast as we can. And most novice runners, when we start, we overstride,
Mm.
meaning our foot is out in front of your knee when you strike the ground. And this really causes increased ground reaction forces to go from the ground up through your foot and ankle, shin, and up to the knee. So it does put a lot of stress on your kneecap joint and can add some irritation. So that's, generally speaking, one of the big reasons and causative factors. The other one is that we just don't have the foundational strength for running. So your running has a type of what we call a collapsing pattern, and your hip
Mm,
drops on one side, the knee goes inward, and the knee goes in because your femur bone goes in, and everything that controls the femur bone are up at the hip. So it's actually your hip muscles that control the direction that your femur bone goes in, and then your knee goes in, and it causes this kind of what we call maltracking of the
mm,
kneecap. And some may have went to a medical professional and they might have said like, hey, you have tracking problems with your
mm.
kneecap. It's not the kneecap that is the problem. It is usually above or below the kneecap that's the
Hmm.
problem. So it is like a lot of people talk about this, the analogy of like a train on a track. Your
Hmm.
kneecap is the train, the track is the femur bone. And we used to initially, like the beginning of my career, we only focused on the train, the track, the kneecap. We would tape the patella all the time.
Hmm.
You'd focus on trying to isolate VMO exercise to control the way the patella glides when you contract your quads. And through research, a lot of great work has been done. It's actually a problem with the track. So it's a problem with the
Oh,
femur going inward because of weak hip muscles. So if you can
mm,
kind of find out the root cause of why you're getting the patellofemoral pain, then that's going to be the long-term fix.
yeah. Well said. I can't agree with you more. I do think it's a tracking issue. I do think it's just muscle imbalance. I'll just share a personal experience with this. Again, like, you know, I think I told you when we've talked in the past and when I've been on your bike, I've been running for pretty much my whole life, But then when I was 35, we had our daughter, and for some reason, like I don't know, it's a hormonal thing or whatever. I just didn't want to leave the house. We had this new baby, and I had I had my training buddies, and I just didn't want to like leave, and I just wanted to stay home. So I kind of changed my routine. I bought a cheap treadmill. We put it in our office, and I would do I was trying to do all these miles on this like really cheap treadmill, etc. And man, maybe it was like some other habits. I'm not blaming it on the daughter or the treadmill, but I developed this condition. Like I got so much. I remember one day it just like it felt so uncomfortable, and then like the next morning I had so much effusion or swelling around the knee, and I could barely move it. And I'm like, oh my god, what did I do? Did I tear something up? And I'll just long story short, Duane, like for 2 years I could not run. It was like 18, 19 months of like pushing it, and then you get a lot of effusion, and then there's no structural thing with the problem with the knee. That's the issue. Like, again, I'm in the healthcare field, so I got MRIs, all these things, and it all came down to I think muscle imbalance, strength training, which was something I think you promote a lot. I got to tell you, there was a time I was just like, hey, maybe I'm just done. Maybe I'm just some washed up guy. I had a nice running career. This is it. But this is a very frustrating condition, I think, for a lot of people because there's no structural issue. Sometimes you get so much effusion and pain, you just cannot move. And I got so out of shape. Duane. I mean, it was just amazing how much fitness I lost in 2 years. And I think, for the past 7 years, I'm kind of gradually getting that back in a kind of a positive trajectory. But this is a very challenging condition, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, no, and your story is like very common. Like how many runners that, contact us to, seek help, and it still bewilders me of, some of the negative talk in terms of like, well, your knees aren't good and you're going to get arthritis, and like there's literally no evidence at all. In fact,
Mm-mm.
runners actually have less incidence of osteoarthritis in the knees than non-runners do. But this is something that is easily correctable with the right plan, and it is a matter of finding out what are those muscle imbalances. So the strength is usually the key. There are some muscle length issues that could also be contributory factors, in terms of like rectus length, quad length, is usually the big one. The IT band can contribute a little bit as well, but yeah, through my
But yeah,
dissertation stuff,
yeah.
the
I
IT
wish, man.
band.
I wish I would have known you. Maybe you would have made that a 2 month recovery instead of a 2 year recovery.
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
It was very challenging. And I remember at one point, I tried to seek every resource I could. I went to this one physician. The doc, and I'm trying to bite my lips, or I should say, and not say anything negative. And he's like, "Hey, don't you know running's bad for your? Just pick up a different sport." And man, like like 6 months before, I'm running like 33, 34 minute 10Ks, and this guy's telling me I should never run again. And it was just like such a it gave me a different perspective, let's put it that way, on how frustrating it can be for people, and how some of this preventative stuff that maybe we'll talk about right now can really go a long way from preventing some really like long-term issues for people. And then the other thing, I'll just kind of go on my rant here is, I think sometimes, let's say someone picks up running, right? And they have the best intentions, and they go, okay, I want to become more physically fit. And they pick it up, and they get like, this issue. They go to their provider, and they'll say, hey, why don't you pick up a different sport? This is bad for your knees. I don't think that's the right answer. I really don't. And this person has the best intentions. They go to a doctor thinking, hey, like this doctor is going to give me really good advice. And I would argue that's like the worst advice. So um, that's why I like talking to people like you.
Running is literally like the magic pill in terms of the benefits. Seriously, like everyone wants a quick fix, right? And running has been shown in the literature to have so many benefits. Like every literally single system of our bodies benefit from running, and not only physically but mentally. And that's what I've seen, the most, especially since COVID, is how many people have gotten into the sport, into running, right? Not only to make themselves feel better physically, but mentally. Like I was literally on the phone with, someone yesterday that, they do struggle with depression. And they're like, the only thing that really helps manage that is
Mm,
getting outside and running. And I'm not able to do that now because of this injury. And yeah, that type of language and fear and old school mentality that running is bad for the body, I think is really given out by those that have never tried running,
yeah,
and it's not founded in any literature at all. Like the running related literature out there, running related injury literature does show a high incidence. Like I just said, like literally 70 to 80% of runners will get injured at one time or another. But it's not because the act of running is bad. It's just we're not following the proper way
yeah,
to build up. A lot of people aren't patient enough, right? There's a way to actually start running and a progression to that. And like we have that outlined in our like how to start running
hmm,
guide, but it's more of the user error. It's not the actual act of running. And there is a way, and that's why I
yeah,
am so passionate about like strength training and recovery and a properly progressed run plan and nutrition. Like that's all foundational for staying healthy as a runner. And like anyone can literally run.
yeah.
And my we joke about this all the time. My daughter is like, her favorite movie when it first came out was like Ratatouille. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen that, but it's like, Chef Gusto, anyone can cook, like anyone
Yeah,
can run. Like they just need to learn the proper strategies. And like I said, like the health and wellness metrics of our society is terrible as a society, and we should get more people into the sport, into running, and promote running the right way versus telling people that they should think of a different sport or take up
yeah.
something else for exercise.
Yeah, no, it's challenging. Well said. And I will just like one last thing I'll just add about this is like my personal take on what caused me, even though I was a pretty advanced runner, I was always told, like, from our track coaches way back in the day, don't really go to the weight room because you're gonna bulk up. You don't want to turn into like a football player, I guess. And hypertrophy is so hard, and so I think that was my issue, was like I just did not I didn't do any strength training until I got injured, and now I'm a big fan of it. It's just part of my routine. I think it's preventative. I think it's helped me kind of get stronger and continue running. So uh, for me, that was kind of the bottom line, was strength training and just maybe a little patience. And finally I was able to run. Thank God, I didn't stop running. Well, so let's talk about how we can prevent this syndrome.
Yeah, the biggest thing is proper progression, thinking about not overstriding. The easiest way to correct that, by the way, usually it will fix this problem, is increasing your cadence or your steps per minute when you are
Mm,
running. So for those of you who are using like Garmin watches, you can usually look at your metrics and your cadence. Um, don't worry if it's not 180, like that's a myth.
mm,
You should be at 180 cadence. Everyone does have a different cadence that they're most efficient for running, and some trying to get 180 might actually be less efficient than running at
yeah.
170 steps per minute. So their heart rate's going higher and they're not staying in their easy zone when they should be. So, for the majority of my runners, as long as you're in the 160s,
Mm,
you're good, especially if you are taller, because it is a little harder for taller individuals, longer legs to maintain a higher cadence. But just increasing that a little bit, like we're
mm,
talking 4 to 6 steps per minute, not 20. Just trying to increase that a little bit. And usually, what I recommend is just checking in on like my Garmin screen. I'll put that in a custom screen cadence, and it's hardest on our easy runs. So for those that are doing speed work, you're not going to have issues there. It's going to be on your easy recovery runs. Just check in and be like, are you going slow and
hmm
sloppy, or are you actually maintaining a good cadence on those recovery runs? And if you increase that cadence, that will pretty much automatically usually decrease overstriding. Or if you just think about leading with your knee as opposed to kicking your foot out in front, and like think knee
mm.
drive, that usually will take care of that overstriding. But that's kind of one piece of it. The
So
other
just
piece,
sorry about the overstriding. Is it just kind of being mindful of your? Maybe that was another part of my issue. You just maybe the treadmill was making me overstride. Who knows? But so you think that just being mindful and saying, okay, I'm trying to get a certain cadence. Is that how you usually approach your athletes?
yeah. So, if you think of just shorter, quicker steps,
Hmm.
almost like you're running on hot coals, but I have said that to some individuals and they just like really change their gait pattern. So we don't want
Mm.
drastic changes in their gait pattern. Like I always record all my runners and analyze their running form, but we want these little bit of changes, and usually just even that little cue and just saying to yourself while you're running, knee drive is going to allow you to lead with your knee and not lead with your foot. So
I
that's
like
kind
that.
of the big one. Just shorter, quicker steps.
Got it. Got it. Perfect. That sounds like sage advice. I'll try to remember that on my runs. And I totally agree with everything else you said. Just kind of keeping it strong. Maybe addressing some of these imbalances, right? Maybe your quads, hips, and core can cause these imbalances, and strengthening those will only help you, perhaps.
Yeah, and I just want to add to this, Monty, because a lot of people think like, okay, strengthening, I could do that. Let me just go to the gym, do the like machine circuit, or let me just do some squats and lunges. Unfortunately, the muscle groups that are usually imbalanced with patellofemoral pain syndrome or with IT band syndrome is our side hip muscles. So your gluteus medius muscle,
Mm,
your deep hip rotators are the muscles that actually control that femur from going inward, like we talked about earlier. So these muscles need isolation. You need to teach your body how to activate these muscles. So,
mm,
like, I have a nice little instructional video of like a 25-minute like runner activation, kind of level one strength, because a lot of people say like I don't have time for strength training, right? Like
mm-hmm,
25 minutes you can literally activate your 7 running specific muscles, and two of them are going to be that gluteus medius muscle on the side as well as the deep rotators. You got to learn how to activate first, and then we work on strengthening. And that strengthening needs to be on one leg, because when we're running, we're always on one leg. So you need to actually learn how to use those muscles to keep your pelvis level so it's not dropping, like we often see with those that have any knee ailment, whether it's patellofemoral pain syndrome or IT band syndrome.
Oh, interesting. Okay. I'll have to check out that video. Is it on your YouTube channel or
Yes.
I'll probably ask you for the link of it later. Maybe we can put it in the show notes because
Yeah.
that sounds like kind of a cool thing to for people to be aware of. Maybe we're not doing it correctly, so it sounds like you should activate. And then I'm kind of thinking like lateral movements and resistance bands are kind of what you're kind of referring to a little bit.
Yeah, so those will usually be progressions. So once we learn how to feel like a nice burn on the outside back part of your hip,
Mm,
you've like learned how to use that gluteus medius muscle. Yes, a progression could be like lateral band walks out to the
mm,
side or in a squat position. So yes, that's kind of a progression once we kind of have our foot on the ground. But any single leg exercise, Monty, is going to
mm,
help be able to use that gluteus medius muscle from an isometric standpoint, which is what we need in mid stance when we are
mm.
running. So if you think single leg squat, if
Yeah.
you think, a reverse lunge into like a balance position, whenever you're on one leg, you're using that muscle as long as your hips are level and they're not dropping, or doing a step down type of exercise. A lot of people do a step down, but their hip drops when they do it. If you focus on keeping
Mm.
your hips level, then that's going to make sure that that gluteus medius muscle is activated, turned on, doing what it needs to be doing when you're running.
Very good. So it sounds like single leg exercises are a little bit more specific for runners. And that makes perfect sense. I mean, just from a mechanical, I mean, I guess running is really just a controlled fall, like, one legged fall, one legged fall, one legged fall. So that makes perfect sense. Good stuff. Hey, let's jump to the second most common running injury you had mentioned, IT band syndrome. This is kind of a toughie. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what this is and what we can do to prevent it and maybe some of the symptoms. This is a
Yeah,
tough one. This is so challenging.
it is. And it can be definitely more sharp pain, and
Hmm.
it can literally like stop you in your tracks during that long
Oh,
run.
yeah.
And this is just so common in the marathoners, especially first time marathoners or novice marathoners.
Mm,
You're going back for seconds and you're really trying to, now you got a time goal, and you're most likely doing some of your training runs and your long runs maybe faster than you should be, than your fitness level currently is at, as opposed to the time you're shooting for at the race.
mm,
And especially if you are in hilly terrain and you're doing a lot of downhill running, or you're training for one of the rebel races that are all downhill. So you've implemented a lot of downhill running into your long runs
mm,
because you want to train for the race, which is great. Um, this is when this creeps up, and it usually never is a problem when you run 5, 6, 8 miles. This is classically going to show up on the 14,
mm,
16, 18, 20 miler. Like I've had clients like start working with me with like, my knee was totally fine the whole training cycle. I did a 20 miler and my IT band, quote unquote, blew up, right? And you
mm,
had this sharp pain, and now it's just completely irritable, irritated. So that's when this start. It's very localized, as opposed to patellofemoral pain syndrome I mentioned is kind of global. You can't point to it. This is, you can point to the outside part of your knee.
mm,
It's right where your finger is. You can point to it, and it could be sharp, and then it could be a dull achy throughout the rest of the day. And it's usually, those inclines, walking even downstairs will like increase that
mm,
pain, as opposed to patellofemoral pain syndrome. A lot of times walking upstairs might irritate that. So those are the kind of what you would feel with
mm,
this. And it is just like irritation of the band. There's a little bone on the outside of part of your femur, and there was just too much load than what the band was ready for. And a lot of what we just mentioned before with patellofemoral pain syndrome of going inward is actually the problem with runners. It's not so much, and we used to think this, again, like in the beginning of my PT school journey, of it's the repetitive knee bending and straightening only.
mm, mm,
Now we know that it is more of a frontal plane and transverse plane type of injury.
mm,
So it does lead to the pelvic drop, or those runners that have a very narrow step width. And maybe when you're running, your feet are very close together. So your hip is outside of where your foot lands. That
mm,
does put a lot of stress and strain on the IT band because it's a structure on the outside part of your thigh. So, this is more of something that will be corrected with a lot of the exercises and muscle groups that we just talked about for patellofemoral pain syndrome. And the other thing that I'll add here, because
mm,
everyone has always tried this, they've done this, the old like, oh, I was told to like foam roll my IT band. And it's
mm,
like painfully dreadful. Like if anyone has ever gone directly over the band, you can agree that will not really heal this condition. And please, please, please do not ever roll right over the painful spot on the
Mm,
bottom part of the knee. You're only going to irritate the heck out of this. But what I found is kind of a little simple recipe that I've modified from doing, like, I'm sure you've probably seen like stainless steel instrument assisted soft tissue massage, like Graston technique, those types of things, those coursework. How we release that structure is kind of slightly in front of the band, slightly behind the band, which
mm-hmm.
actually releases the fascia that it connects to and causes a decompressive effect. So I've kind of modified that philosophy once I, started implementing that in the clinic, found some good results, to self-care, doing self-myofascial release with the foam roller, where you do it slightly in front of the band, slightly behind the band. So I do have a good video, instructional video on how to do that on my channel as well, for kind of like top 7 muscles to foam roll for runners, if you guys want to check that out. But that will help decrease the stress and strain, like a decompressive effect to the actual IT band. But you can't stretch the IT band. That's first off,
Yeah.
because that's what I learned in my kind of research with my
Thank you for
dissertation.
saying that. Yeah, because it's so counterintuitive. Maybe say it again.
Yeah, you cannot stretch the IT band, guys. It's a connective tissue. It's literally a fibrous connective tissue that runs all the way from your hip down to your knee. The muscle is a small little muscle up your hip, your TFL muscle, tensor fascia lata. No, it's not a coffee that you got from Starbucks, right? Like, it's a small little muscle. You can't stretch it. And they've actually done studies with cadavers and try to take the structure off, and they try to, like,
Mm,
the amount of strain that you need to add to it to actually get it to stretch and improve its length, we cannot physically do with
impossible.
self stretches. So stop stretching your IT band. You're wasting your time. Start decompressing the area and start strengthening your hip muscles. The glutes are king. So you got to activate and then strengthen the glutes.
Yeah. So glutes, hip flexors, and then like you said, you cannot stretch. I mean, the classic teaching is it will blunt a scalpel in the cadaver lab. If you try to cut this fibrous tissue. I remember, like, in cadaver lab when I was in medical school, I tried to. I was a runner, and I was like really interested in like trying to cut this thing. And for unfortunately, our cadaver's IT band was already destroyed, so I didn't get to. I can't tell you firsthand if you can actually cut through the thing or not. But yeah, it's like you said, it's a fibrous band of tissue running from the hip to the knee, basically. And it's almost impossible to stretch, or it is impossible to stretch. And it's a little counterintuitive because, again, you feel like you should stretch it and you feel like that's the problem, but that is not the culprit. The culprit is, like you said, glutes and maybe just increasing your mileage. And you also mentioned it happens more in newer runners. Is that just you think more advanced runners with years of higher mileage that their bodies just adapted to this?
Yes, unless, it can happen in seasoned runners who are maybe doing their first marathon or really going
Mm,
outside of their, fitness level. But yes, like, the runner error and training errors is the most common cause as well. And not
yeah.
allowing proper recovery. You missed a long run because you were away on vacation. So you figured you can do, a 12 or a 14 miler on the Monday or Tuesday, and then next Saturday is when you normally do your long run. So now there's only like 5 days or 4 days in between two long runs. And then this creeps up, right? Or you make sudden jumps, or you're running that first ever 18 miler
Hmm.
just too fast, because you're saying, oh, my marathon pace, like, my goal is to run a 9-minute pace, let's say, right?
Hmm.
So you're like, well, I should be able to do that for at least 16 or 18 miles, right? If I'm going to do it for 26.2. No, right? Like, that's not how we train. And especially if you haven't done multiple marathons. Like, once you do multiple marathons, then there are specific workouts within a long run that you would do. But even those workouts are not the whole run that you're running at
Right.
marathon pace, like goal pace. So it's
Yeah.
usually those training errors that leads to this problem.
Yeah, well said. And maybe training progression is also, or gradual training progression, I would say, is probably very beneficial for someone maybe starting out for their first marathon, and maybe kind of making sure they prevent these training errors, because they're easy to do, and it's no fault of anyone. It's just very, very, very natural to have these training errors. I love it. Strengthening the hip and glute muscles. You can't really stretch this band, and I love what you're like. I love your approach, because if you Google this stuff, it'll say rice, rest ice, anti-inflammatory, stretching. That would be like the Google answer, right? And none of that is correct. So
No, it really is not.
yeah,
For many of these conditions, have I had someone have a really, irritable IT band syndrome where I actually did have to have them stop running for 2 or 3 days and maybe recommend some NSAIDs and to calm things down? Yes, but that's like higher tissue irritability where the tissue, they're in like an 8 out of 10 pain. They're having pain with walking. Then yes, there's a place for that. But the majority of people who have this condition are not in that area, and they're not going to benefit from just resting, icing it, stop running for a week or two, and then try it again. They're going to actually benefit
yeah,
from modifying their run plan for a couple of days, allowing it to calm down, activate the right muscles, and then strengthen their body, rebuild their body to be a more stronger, resilient running body, and do the proper training. That's what's going to get rid of this for the long term and to prevent it from coming back. Because the other thing we didn't talk about, Monty, is like many of these, they're not just like you suffer from at one time. These are like the reoccurring
that's
every
true.
time you train for a half marathon, every time you train for a marathon. Oh, my IT band comes back. Oh, I have like a cranky IT band. I have a bad
Yeah,
IT band. Now, you weren't born with the bad IT band, right? Like there are reasons why this keeps coming back, and we need to really get down to the root cause of why that's happening, whether it's from a training standpoint or from just a kind of movement standpoint, physical standpoint, muscle imbalance standpoint.
yeah. I love what you said about the anti-inflammatories. Maybe it's sometime I have some strong opinions about anti-inflammatories. I will say this again: don't ever listen to me. Talk to your provider. All of those disclaimers. But I have heard some people like tell me, and like it just like sends red flags down my spine. It's like, hey, like, I'm having this pain, and I was told to take some NSAIDs before my run, and then to go and do these training runs. Man, I can't tell you how against that I am. Like prophylactic NSAIDs before
Right.
it runs, especially if it's hot and your kidneys are already taking a load. I mean, again, not a great idea in my opinion. Again, talk to your provider, but prophylactic NSAIDs to get through a run is generally a bad idea. My take on it.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And
Yeah,
it even does impede actual muscle recovery. And so when we are running, when we're strength training, our muscles are breaking down. And then it's the actual rebuilding process after we're done with the activity that the muscle grows. And NSAIDs actually impede that process of
yeah,
muscle growth. So,
yeah.
if you're taking it prophylactically to just avoid feeling any pain, um, I would highly not recommend that.
Yeah, I mean, it could be nephrotoxic, 100%. Okay, sir, let's talk about shin splints. This is also kind of a common one, a little tricky, and sometimes it can be kind of linger on.
It can, yeah. Most people, again, will have this as a reoccurring issue. And this one is one of those that, people just stop running and they're like, there's no way I could ever be a runner. I just always get shin splints. And, we've been able to, luckily help people be able to get running as part of their life again. So this is pain on the shin bone. Typically it is, I guess I'll talk the more common one, which is on the inside part of the
Hmm.
shin bone. You could get lateral shin splints on kind of the front part of the shin, on more the outside part of the shin, which is more like your anterior tibialis muscle. That one is a lot more rare, honestly, in
Hmm.
runners. Usually it is on the inside part, or we call like medial tibial stress syndrome. So it is really the connective tissue, that the soft tissue, the muscles there connect to the bone. that winds up getting irritated. And it's this repetitive stress on the shin bone, on the connective tissue, where those muscles attach. And, it is usually always associated with spike in training load, doing too much too soon. And that's why, someone just gets motivated. Like, I'm going to put my running shoes on. I'm going to run this 5K in 4 weeks from now. Let me start running. Right. And, you're just doing a little too much too soon. And we usually see it at kind of both ends of the spectrum in terms of foot posture and arch height. So those that have really flat pancake feet, no arches, will tend to get this. And then those with the really high arch, cavus foot type, you don't attenuate a lot of shock. You're not a good shock absorber. Will tend to get these. And, the biggest thing we talked about overstriding before with runner's knee, that's the biggest reason why people have shin splints is overstriding. And if you think about like someone who has a large heel strike, like they have, if you look from the side view, their toe is pointing way up to the ceiling, and then that heel is going to hit the ground. And now the foot needs to get flat as we transition in our running gait cycle. But now it's got many more degrees to go to get to the floor. And what controls that is our muscles. So our muscles actually function eccentrically. It slows down the foot hitting the ground, and there's more increased load and tension on those muscles that probably haven't been strengthened to tolerate that demand. So that's the kind of the reason, why we get it. And it is this soreness, achiness. You could have a little bit of swelling in that area if it is pinpoint specific. Like you're pointing to like, oh, this area on my bone it kills me right here. And you can point to it. Then that's when we start to really, wonder about like bone stress injuries. So if you are getting it very localized, but generally speaking, this is something that's more like achy, and it just feels like fatigued. You feel like you've been standing on your feet for like 20 hours after a run, or later in the day, if you have to work where you're on your feet, you're like, why are my feet like throbbing? My ankles, my shins, they're like throbbing. That's kind of the symptoms that you're going to feel with this.
So it sounds like shin splints are, again, pain along the tibia or the inner side of our lower leg. And like you said, it's inflammation of the tendons, muscles, bone tissue around the tibia, perhaps. And sometimes this pain. And then maybe like I like what you just brought up about some of the kind of maybe differentials, some of the more concerning differentials. Obviously stress injuries or stress fractures are certainly going to be on your differential, right? Other things, maybe exertional compartment syndrome could be in your differential. So this one is a little bit, I guess, it's very common. Most of the time, it's going to be shin splints. Most of it is going to be. We'll talk about it. But there are some times where you need to maybe do a deeper dive and make sure it's not these other conditions before you continue running. Is that a fair statement?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I guess here's the thing. Like I've also recently kind of learned that maybe our calf muscle, specifically our soleus muscle, might contribute to this. What I mean by that is like maybe the act of running is, especially the calf muscle is so much engaged, especially the soleus. As our audience might know, there's gastrocnemius and soleus that contribute to the calf muscle. But I was reading somewhere where not only is Achilles tendinopathy maybe associated with a weak sort of soleus, but maybe this condition as well. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, this is a great point that you brought up, Monty, because out of all of the muscles in our legs, when we're doing the majority of our runs at easy pace, which everyone should be who are listening to this, right? The muscle out of all the muscles in our legs that are contracting the greatest percentage of their maximum voluntary contraction is our calf muscles. So they're actually working the hardest out of any other muscle when we are running at a slower pace, at easy pace. And it is because it is slowing down the translation of our tibia moving forward as we kind of move over that leg. And weakness, doesn't allow for that control, and there's more force to that area. So we need strong calf muscles, and specifically what controls that tibial advancement is more the soleus muscle that doesn't cross the knee joint. So yes, isolating, soleus strengthening exercises, meaning doing calf raises with your knee slightly bent,
Yeah.
is really important for preventative strategies, as well as like performance wise. But yeah, it is important that if you have weakness, and there's a simple test, Monty, like any runner can do, like literally as you're listening to this, maybe if you're in the car, you're not going to do this in the car while you're driving, but maybe even if you're running, like take a little break, catch your breath, try to see how many single leg calf raises you can do. Hold on for light balance, stand on one leg, go up and down, rising up on your toes, coming down nice and slowly, and see how many you can do. And, all runners should be able to do 25 single leg calf raises with good control. And I see many, many runners that I work with that cannot do that. And they are even like super talented runners too. Like some fast runners, you're like, wow, this person's like really fast runner. They're gonna be able to like blow these out of the water. Like you'll be surprised. There's probably some people who are gonna try that, and they're gonna be like, whoa, I only got like 12. I thought I could definitely do 25. So that could lead to issues down the road, right? If you don't address it. So one of those issues is shin splints. Another one is Achilles issues, and then even plantar fasciitis down at the foot.
Well said. Yeah. 100%. And then I love what you said about isolating this. Generally we want to, when we're doing strength training, maybe stay away from the machines. I don't know if that's true or not, but one machine I think that is very valuable is that seated calf raise. A lot of gyms have it where you sit down and you load it up. That one I think is 90% isolating the soleus and maybe a little bit of gastroc, but really the soleus is such a specific muscle for running, especially if you're going uphills. You're engaging that soleus so much. So I'm a big fan of the soleus, just FYI.
Yeah, no, that is it's so funny. We just had within our membership group, I mentioned the same exact machine and exercise because someone asked a question about that. And yeah, it is a great way to isolate the soleus, that seated calf machine. And then I also like to recommend, because technically our knees never bent at 90 degrees when we run, because then that'd be a problem. If we were, if we could ideally find a way to bend your knee around the 30-degree angle, and keep it at that 30-degree angle as you do the resisted plantar flexion, then that probably even a little translate into kind of a little bit more functional use of how the muscle's functioning when we're running. But yeah, it is important to make sure that we are isolating the soleus.
Because I think the standing calf raises, the machines that are standing calf raises, I think that's getting mostly the gastroc, and it's, you see the bodybuilders really focusing on those, the standing calf raises, if you can picture, and because that's the cosmetic muscle. The gastroc is like the sexy one. The soleus is like the one that we care about. I mean, they both can be kind of sexy, but I guess the gastroc is the one that you more commonly see people working out.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, you can do even like with a single leg, right? You can stand on one leg and bend your knee to about 20 degrees. Your quads are going to wind up firing isometrically to keep your knee there, but you could still isolate the soleus. There are other ways in some types of leg press machines where you can do like calf raise and just bend your knees to about 20 or 30 degrees. So those are ways that I found, you can try to make it a little bit more functional and get that soleus. But yeah, absolutely.
Love it, man. Yeah, and I love the soleus. Okay, so let's talk about, man, our next condition, plantar fasciitis. Man, I've had so many advanced running teammates and friends who just like this pops out of the blue. Like, these people are like 240 marathoners, who like have been running for years, and then one morning they wake up. And this is just always kind of a fear for, I think, everyone. Please educate us a little bit more on this condition, how we can prevent it, what we should know about it.
Yeah, this injury does not discriminate. It hits everyone. Honestly, it hits the new runners, the advanced runners. It hits you in your 30s. It could hit you in your 50s, even in your 60s. And yeah, I've had.
Luckily, I'm in my 20s, so I should be okay, right?
Yeah, I've definitely had battles of this myself and been able to stave it off, which is good. But yeah, this one sucks. It's pain right on your heel,
Mm,
and a little bit more specifically to the inside part of your heel. And it is the classic sign is, the worst pain that you feel during the day is first thing in the morning. You get out of bed, right? Everyone goes to the bathroom and it's like you're limping. You're like, what the heck? And then it loosens up. It
mm,
feels a little better 5 or 10 minutes later. And then as this condition just builds up over time if you don't do anything about it, unfortunately. So now it's been months and it's getting worse. And now you're starting to feel it toward the end of a run, or you're starting to feel it in the beginning of a run. So you kind of
mm,
you feel it in the beginning of the run. You're like, oh damn, my foot hurts. And then it loosens up. You don't even notice it in the middle of the run. And then on your long runs, you're like, whoa, I'm starting to feel that heel pain again. And after your run, it might be a little sore, but it's not bad. So you're like, okay,
mm,
well, I'm getting over it. It's healing. The next morning after your long run, you go to get out of bed and you're like, holy crap, like here it is again. So,
mm,
that's the classic. It happens. I've been there before. Trust me. Yeah, that's what you're going to
mm.
feel with this. So it's not a numbness tingling.
Yeah,
It's
this is a
just
tough
a
one.
sharp
Yeah.
pain. And then it's going to be like dull and achy. And then you might also notice it if you do have a sitting job, you go to get up from your desk. So you've been sitting for a while, you'll feel pain those first couple of steps.
Mm,
And we usually feel it more on the propulsive phase of running as opposed to, because you would think it's like your heel. So I don't want to strike with my heel. If I like land on the ball of my toe, then it's going to be better. But we usually feel pain actually when we push off with this because we're stretching the
mm,
fascia. And the reason why we feel it first thing in the morning is because when we sleep at night, most of us, like, our feet are pointed downward. So
mhm,
they're like, no one really sleeps with their toes pointed upward, right? So that fascia, that tissue on the bottom of our foot that connects to the calcaneus bone, and it's right at that attachment site where you get the irritation, winds up shortening overnight. And then you're there for
mm.
6, 7, 8. I don't know if you guys got 8 hours. I'm jealous. Right. So it just tightens up. And then you take your first step out of bed in the morning. The weight of our body splays that fascia. And now we're putting our body weight through it. And it leads to that irritation where it
Mm.
connects to the bone. So that's the reason why we do feel that pain there.
Yeah, this is a tough one. What I guess before we get into the treatment, and we can talk about that here in a second, but what measures can we do to prevent this? Like you said, it doesn't discriminate. It hits everyone. Or I should say everyone, but it can potentially hit anyone, right? Someone who's been training for 30 years, someone who just started. So is there any preventive measures you think, Dwayne?
Yeah, there's a couple. Number one, I think all runners need to really prioritize foot health. And
Mm,
that's like one of our kind of 6 steps to growing as a runner. We got to take care of like properly progress run plan, strength. You got to have the mindset, nutrition, I mentioned before, recovery. Within recovery, foot health is its own category because we're putting a lot of pounding on our feet and all those miles. So
mm,
you have to maximize foot recovery. Couple of strategies you can do there is number one, stretching of your toes. So if you've ever seen like toe
mm,
spacers, toe splay, Naboso is a product and a brand that I think is phenomenal in terms of their foot recovery
mm,
products. But our feet are usually kind of squished in our running shoes,
mhm,
and we need to actually stretch those small muscles on the bottom of our foot and stretch the fascia, and then most importantly, learn how to activate the deep foot muscles to help take stress off of the fascia when we're running. So the stronger your foot core, we call it,
mm,
is just like your core in your trunk and your abs, and your like core strength is important. There's a foot core, and you need to actually, and most of us don't know how to activate those muscles because I was there. I wore custom foot orthotics for
mm,
15 years, always ran in them, and all of my muscles on the bottom of my foot atrophied in such I couldn't even separate my toes. And I was only like 30 something years old. I'm like, this
mm,
is ridiculous. I literally can't move my toes because they forgot how to work those muscles. So, kind of activating those deep foot muscles, foot recovery is super important. And then also not making a drastic, significant changes in your running shoe selection,
I like that.
meaning you just started training for a marathon training cycle. You're like, I'm going to get the new shoes. Let me go get ultras because I heard zero drop is best.
Yeah.
And if you went from an 8, 10, 12 millimeter heel drop shoe to zero drop, or even if you went from 12 to 4, that's going to change forces when you're running and shift the forces from more proximal hip and knee to now foot and ankle. And that is usually one of the triggers we'll see for someone who gets Achilles tendon pain or plantar fasciitis is that, and it's not that the shoe is bad, it's just the fact that you haven't allowed your body to adapt to that shoe and or don't have the strength to control that shoe, and you haven't really like taken down your training enough. So if we were patient enough, right, and we really gradually, like all of us could eventually do barefoot running if we really wanted to, but it's been so many years since any of us have run barefoot, right? We would need to literally start at such a slow rate that we would get bored by it, or we'd be like, this isn't doing anything for me exercise or mental clearing miles at all, and we would just like give up. So it is a matter of like gradually progressing. And, in terms of the shoes, looking at that heel drop and more the minimalist shoes, if your goal is to get there, you got to gradually do it. And that's gradual. What I've been doing, each year is, try to just decrease a little bit more stability as I consistently work on my foot core, right? And work on some of those muscles.
Great. So now I have to do foot muscles exercises, Duane. I don't know if I have the time. No, I agree though, and I think part of it was like there was all this literature about the Tarahumara Indians and how they would go run barefoot and they're 90 and they're doing these ultras, right? And then so a lot of people, I remember this this was like a couple decades ago, maybe a decade ago, like this minimalist shoe phase came about, and everyone's like, hey, so maybe the missing element, the reason I'm not able to run is because I'm wearing shoes. And then a lot of people had all kinds of problems, stress fractures, etc. So you got to do this very gradual, and then the other thing I would just add, I don't know if you agree with this, I hear this a lot, like, oh, my plantar fascia is acting up and I was told my calf muscles are tight, right? And I don't disregard that calf muscles can be tight, but generally, and please feel free to correct me, but like when you go for a run and you feel like your calf muscles are tight, right? And you think, okay, the next logical thing is to stretch it. I would also add, maybe think about it this way. It's not maybe the calf muscles that are tight. Maybe the load you provided for your calf muscles were not able to handle. There was a mismatch. And I'm not saying your calf muscles were weak. It's just that there was a load intolerance there. And it's maybe the treatment is not just stretching it, maybe strengthening those calf muscles. Because you hear this a lot.
Yeah, you bring up a good point because strengthening is super important. Stretching in general for runners is way, way over sold, right? Or we think, and a lot of runners listening to this right now, you might be like, well, I thought I was like, if I need to exercise, I need to stretch, and I'm not stretching enough, and that's why I got injured. Generally speaking, it is not because your muscles don't have the proper length or you're not doing enough stretches. However, I will say, if there was one muscle group that I have found throughout my 20-year career as a PT that would be a contributory factor to injuries in the foot and ankle, it is decreased muscle length of the calf muscles. So just because it will limit ankle mobility, and so there's two different things, flexibility, ankle mobility, both of those can be contributory factors to plantar fasciitis, and that's been shown in the literature, that if we lack the ankle mobility, and then if you think about running on elevation, it requires more ankle mobility. So a lot of people who don't have the ankle mobility, now you have more stress and strain to the soft tissue structures. So, this is one instance where if you actually do lack ankle mobility, then stretching and, doing self-myofascial release to the calf muscles will definitely be helpful for you. But it is more the stretching the fascia itself, number one, first thing in the morning before you get out of bed, so you're not getting that constant irritation every single day. So it's just simple, literally grab your foot, you can pull your big toe back, flex your ankle, and that's going to actually loosen the fascia up. You can give a little massage with your knuckle. I have a nice video on how to do those as well. But like that's important. But then the deep foot strength is so
Mm.
important. And you mentioned before, like now you got to take time to strengthen your deep foot muscles. You know what, Monty? That is actually one of the muscle groups that's in that 25-minute video on strength training for runners, because it is so important to be able to activate our deep foot muscles, especially anyone who spends all of their day in like regular traditional shoes,
Sure. Yeah.
especially if you wear a heeled shoe, boots or Oxfords, or females, casual dress shoes, stuff like that. Most of your day, your calf muscles are going to be tight. Your foot muscles are going to really not be
Mm.
active if you're always in supportive shoes.
Yeah. No, I agree. I was just joking about that. But the thing
I
is,
know.
like, like I just don't have the 20 minutes a week to do my foot muscles, but I guess I should try to find it somehow. Um, Speaking of, like you said about stretching, and sometimes it's maybe a little bit, we take that, we focus a little bit too much on stretching. Maybe you can just briefly tell us what are some of the key components of an effective warm up routine to maybe even prevent injuries.
It's movement. It's getting blood flow
Okay.
into our joints. It's getting our muscles turned on. And how we do that is with like a dynamic movement prep, or dynamic stretches, some people will call it. So yeah, I got a nice 5-minute routine on my YouTube channel, that you can learn how to like warm up sufficiently before running. We do it at all of our local road races, for those that are in Connecticut. And it really just primes the body for go time. So it's not that you are taking the first mile or two. Yes, the first mile or two should be at a little slower pace to allow the heart rate response so it doesn't spike, right? And keep it in your easy
Hmm.
zone. But it shouldn't be the first mile or two is like, I feel so
Yeah.
stiff. And, you feel clumsy and you're like, I don't feel like I'm even doing anything yet because my muscles aren't turned on. Once you start doing literally a 5-minute like dynamic warm up before your runs, it's literally like magic. And it was funny. I actually just literally saw a post in one of my clients. It
Hmm.
was 1 week into our program, and she had wrote that of like doing the 25-minute strength exercise I mentioned to you, as well as the warm up before her runs, and how much better she feels for the runs. So that is so much more important than actually even stretching. And you certainly do not want to do any static stretching,
Yeah.
sit and reach, hold like the old sit and reach test or the hamstring
Yeah.
stretch before you run. There's
Yeah.
no reason, rationale, and it's not going to help you for your run.
Yeah, I mean, unless you're a ballerina, you really don't need to do static stretching, I think. Is that, I don't know. Dynamic
Yep.
stretching is what you need to do. And I love what you just said about kind of just a warm up. Here's my like take on effective warm up. I totally agree. Dynamic stretching, there's like we'll reference your warm ups. There's probably many different ways of doing this. I will also add, if you have a shorter distance, I think that the warm up is a lot more important than like a marathon distance. If you're like, I've seen people like run these 5Ks and they just show up, get out of the car, and run a 5K.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I think that's, I would argue that it would be potentially dangerous. If you do that for a marathon, really, man, like, the first 5K of a marathon, you should be warming up anyway. And,
Right.
I don't know if you should do a 20-minute warm up before a marathon. You only have so much glycogen. I don't really recommend that. But certainly for a shorter distance. So I would say they're probably inversely related. So, like, I would say the time you spent warming up should be inversely related to the distance of the race. I don't know if you agree with that.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. So for most of our 5K runners, it is a matter of, doing a nice 20-minute jog, easy jog, get the blood flow in there, and then go through your movement prep, probably go through some drills, probably do some strides if you're really putting it all out there. And yeah, I found the same thing, Monty. I raced 2 5Ks for the first time in like probably 4 years this past spring. And I just didn't understand it. People just literally show up. They're just standing around, and then when the race starts, they're going 100%.
Yeah.
It is very dangerous, especially for us middle-aged runners, because yeah, you can
who,
definitely
who are you calling
injure
middle
something.
age?
I know. I got
Yeah,
I
yeah.
got like a decade on you, I
Speak for
believe, right?
yourself. Yeah, 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 yeah. I'm joking. I'm actually older than Duane. This is so fun. Just talking to you. Is there anything I'm forgetting to ask? Did I any kind of big items on these sort of injuries that we should maybe kind of finish up on?
The most important thing is that, all of these injuries that we talked about today, you can continue to run and they are not going to be career ending injuries. So you will get better and you will overcome them. You just need to have the proper strategies, find the right person that is going to be able to kind of get you over that hump. And you don't need to stop running for 6 to 8 weeks, go to quote unquote rehab 2 to 3 times a week, and then your pain goes away and you're discharged. And then they say, oh, yeah, go back into running, because that is going to be the fast track for this to just be a recurring cycle every single 6 months, every single year that you go to train for that like goal half marathon or marathon that you want to run. So you have to kind of keep the body running, allow the tissues to heal, and you will get over this and really start to think about running as part of kind of the 6 steps I mentioned before. In order to like optimize your running, you got to think about the mindset piece, strength training, run plan, nutrition, recovery, and
Mm,
then those that like racing, race strategy. Like all those are important. And like when you execute those 6 steps in your running journey, you're going to feel more confident in getting stronger and faster and like growing in your running journey. And the best part is you're going to stay healthy and like enjoy the process of training. Like you mentioned before, Monty, like how much you're enjoying the process of training now and like your fitness level is improving. Um, we all can do that. So
hmm.
don't think that you're too old,
Yeah,
because it's not an age thing. It really isn't. Yes, we need to do different things in our 40s or 50s than we did in our 20s, but you can still run. You could still get out there. You could still get PRs, believe it or not. So
100%. I
you
totally
can get
agree.
over these.
And you can always come back. I'm telling you, man. That's the story of humans. We can always make a comeback. So if you have an injury, maybe consult someone like Duane. Someone who's a runner who knows the stuff and it's not going to tell you rice and stop running. Hey, it was great chatting with you. Good luck with all your. I think you guys have some volleyball meets coming up, so good luck with all of that. That should be fun. And man, I know we'll be in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, if you guys are listening to podcasts, you're listening to this, check out Healthy Runner. If anything I said today resonated with you, you'll find deep dives on all of the injuries we talked about today. If you want to learn more about plantar fasciitis, and if you want to learn more about each of those injuries, I also have some, downloadable ebooks where you can actually get a little deeper dive, get those specific exercises that we kind of talked about today. If you just go to learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com, you guys can download those free resources.
Perfect. Is that the best way for people to connect with your team and your programs?
Yeah,
Okay.
just learn.sparkhealthyrunner.com. You'll find our free ebooks. And if you wanted to, inquire about some of the services that we offer as well, that'd be the best place to go. And yeah, the podcast, there's a lot of great resources. You'll
Yeah.
hear a great interview with Monty on there about
I don't know about
heat
that.
adaptation.
Uh,
No, that was a great episode. I've got a lot of great feedback on it. So
oh,
thank you.
good. Yeah, that was my pleasure. That was fun. It's always fun talking to you. It really is. It feels like just talking to an old friend. So, well, again, this has been a pleasure. We'll be in touch, Duane, and then keep up the good work.
Sounds good, man.
All
Keep
right,
running.
buddy.